My name is Rachel. I'm 26 years old, and I used to believe that parents always had their children's best interests at heart. Growing up in our suburban Phoenix home, trust was something I gave freely, especially to the two people who raised me. That blind faith cost me everything when I discovered my credit score had been destroyed by a $40,000 luxury sedan sitting in my parents' driveway, purchased entirely in my name without my knowledge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day I had that car towed away during their 25th wedding anniversary party, with all their friends watching, wasn't just about getting justice. It was about reclaiming my entire future. The Martinez family looked perfect from the outside. Our house on Saguaro Drive was a beautiful two-story stucco home with a red tile roof, perfectly manicured desert landscaping, and two luxury cars always parked in the circular driveway. My father, Carlos Martinez, worked as a senior sales manager at one of Phoenix's largest electronics distributors. His charm and persuasive personality made him incredibly successful at work, bringing home commissions that funded our comfortable lifestyle. My mother, Linda Martinez, managed the household with military precision while working part-time as a real estate agent. She had an eye for beautiful things and a talent for making everything look effortless. From the time I was little, appearances mattered immensely in our household. Linda would spend hours preparing for neighborhood barbecues, church events, or school functions, making sure every detail reflected well on the Martinez name. Carlos would regale anyone who listened with stories of his latest sales victories, often embellishing the numbers to sound more impressive. They drove matching BMW sedans, wore expensive clothes, and never missed an opportunity to mention their upcoming cruise or weekend getaway to Sedona. I was their golden child in many ways. Straight-A student throughout high school, scholarship recipient to Arizona State University, and the daughter who never caused trouble. My younger brother Miguel was the opposite, constantly getting into minor scrapes, struggling academically, and testing boundaries at every opportunity. While Miguel's failures were dismissed as boys being boys, my successes were celebrated as proof of superior Martinez parenting. Carlos would beam with pride when introducing me to his colleagues, always mentioning my academic achievements and bright future. During my senior year of high school, Carlos began what he called financial education sessions with me. He explained concepts like credit scores, interest rates, and the importance of building credit history early. Linda would nod approvingly as he outlined strategies for establishing good financial habits. They seemed so knowledgeable, so responsible, so eager to set me up for success. Looking back, I realized these conversations were actually grooming sessions, preparing me to trust them with information that would later destroy my financial future. When I turned 18, Carlos suggested we visit his bank to open my first adult checking account and apply for a student credit card. The bank manager, someone Carlos knew personally from his business dealings, was effusive in his praise for my academic record and future prospects. Everything felt legitimate and supportive. Carlos co-signed for my student card, explaining that his excellent credit would help me qualify for better terms. I felt grateful to have such financially savvy parents guiding my first steps into adulthood. Throughout my freshman year at Arizona State, I used my credit card responsibly, making small purchases and paying them off immediately. Carlos had taught me to never carry a balance, to always pay more than the minimum, and to check my credit report regularly. The irony is devastating now, knowing that while he was teaching me these principles, he was simultaneously planning to violate every one of them using my identity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. My parents' lifestyle had always seemed sustainable to my teenage eyes. But subtle signs of financial stress began appearing during my sophomore year. Linda started shopping at different stores, claiming she was being more budget-conscious, though she still maintained her expensive appearance. Carlos began working longer hours and seemed more stressed about his sales numbers. Their conversations behind closed doors grew more frequent and hushed. When I came home for winter break, I noticed they had switched from their usual imported coffee to store brands, a small change that spoke volumes about their shifting priorities. The financial pressure intensified during my junior year. Miguel had been arrested for underage drinking and driving, resulting in expensive legal fees and court costs. Linda's real estate income had decreased significantly due to market changes, and Carlos mentioned that his company was restructuring, potentially affecting his commission structure. Despite these challenges, they maintained their public facade of success, continuing to drive their luxury cars and attend expensive social events. During this period, Carlos began asking seemingly innocent questions about my student aid, scholarship money, and part-time job earnings. He expressed pride in my financial responsibility and suggested I might benefit from establishing additional credit accounts to further build my credit history. The conversations felt caring and educational, but they were actually intelligence-gathering missions designed to assess my financial resources and creditworthiness. My senior year brought what should have been excitement about graduation and career prospects, but instead revealed the first cracks in my parents' carefully maintained image. Linda started making comments about temporary financial setbacks and the importance of family helping family during difficult times. Carlos mentioned that they might need to make some adjustments to their lifestyle, though he assured me it was nothing serious, just market fluctuations affecting everyone in their social circle. The week before my college graduation, something felt off during my visit home. Carlos seemed unusually interested in my post-graduation plans and kept asking about my salary expectations and the timing of my job start date. Linda was more affectionate than usual, constantly telling me how proud she was and how much they loved me. Miguel, who rarely paid attention to family dynamics, even commented that our parents seemed weird and nervous about something. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in marketing and landed an entry-level position at a growing tech company in Tempe. The salary wasn't huge, but it was enough to cover my student loans, a modest apartment, and basic living expenses. My parents threw a graduation party in our backyard, inviting neighbors, family friends, and Carlos's business associates. Everyone congratulated me on my achievements and bright future. Carlos made a toast about how proud he was to have raised such a responsible, successful daughter. The praise felt genuine, making what I would later discover even more heartbreaking. During the party, I overheard Linda talking to her sister about some financial difficulties they were experiencing. She mentioned something about unexpected expenses and temporary cash flow problems, but quickly changed the subject when she noticed me listening. Carlos spent most of the evening networking with his business contacts, and I caught fragments of conversations about investment opportunities and credit line extensions. At the time, these seemed like normal adult concerns, but they were actually pieces of a puzzle I wouldn't solve for months. My first apartment was a modest one-bedroom unit in a complex popular with young professionals. I felt incredibly proud of my independence and financial responsibility. I had established a budget, was making regular payments on my student loans, and continued using my credit card wisely. Every month, I would check my credit score through my bank's app, watching it steadily improve as I demonstrated consistent payment history and low credit utilization. The first few months of my career were challenging but rewarding. I was learning rapidly, making connections in my industry, and building confidence in my professional abilities. My parents visited my apartment several times, always expressing pride in my accomplishments and the maturity I was demonstrating. Carlos would joke about how quickly I had adapted to adult responsibilities, while Linda would fuss over my decorating choices and offer to help with household purchases. During one of these visits, Carlos mentioned that they were considering upgrading Linda's car. Her BMW was several years old, and he thought she deserved something newer and more reliable. He asked my opinion about different luxury brands and seemed particularly interested in my thoughts about leasing versus purchasing. The conversation felt normal, even flattering that they valued my input on such an important decision. Several weeks later, Linda called to excitedly tell me they had found the perfect car for her. A beautiful new Lexus sedan in pearl white with premium interior features. She described every detail with enthusiasm, mentioning how Carlos had negotiated an excellent deal through his business connections. They invited me over for dinner to see the new car and celebrate their smart purchase. When I arrived, the Lexus was indeed stunning, and Linda was practically glowing with happiness as she showed me all its features. Carlos explained that they had decided to finance the car rather than lease it, because the interest rates were so favorable. He mentioned something about using their excellent credit to secure the best possible terms. The monthly payments were manageable, he assured me, especially with Linda's real estate business picking up again. Everything seemed normal and celebratory, a family enjoying the fruits of their hard work and financial planning. Over the following months, I occasionally saw the Lexus when visiting my parents, and Linda never failed to mention how much she loved driving it. Carlos would comment on the excellent reliability and how smart they had been to choose that particular model. They seemed genuinely happy with their purchase, and I felt pleased that they were able to enjoy such a nice car after years of working hard and raising their children. My own financial situation continued to improve as I received my first raise and performance bonus at work. I was proud of my growing savings account and improving credit score. I had even started researching the possibility of buying a small condo in the near future, wanting to build equity instead of paying rent indefinitely. My parents expressed enthusiasm about my financial goals and offered to help me research neighborhoods and mortgage options when the time came. The first hint that something was wrong came during a routine check of my credit report, before applying for a higher limit credit card to further improve my credit utilization ratio. Among the familiar accounts I recognized, there was an auto loan for $39,847 that I had never opened. The creditor was Southwest Auto Finance, a company I had never heard of, and the loan was dated exactly 3 months earlier, right around the time my parents had purchased Linda's Lexus. My initial reaction was confusion rather than alarm. Credit report errors were common, and I assumed this was simply a case of mistaken identity or clerical error. I called Southwest Auto Finance to report the mistake, expecting a quick resolution. The customer service representative asked for my social security number and address to look up the account. What she told me next made my blood run cold. The auto loan was indeed in my name, with my social security number, and the address listed was my parents' house on Saguaro Drive. The vehicle identification number corresponded to a 2023 Lexus ES 350 in pearl white, exactly matching my mother's new car. The loan had been approved based on my credit score and employment verification from my current job. Monthly payments of $617 were automatically debited from an account I had never opened. I hung up the phone in complete shock, my hands trembling as I tried to process what I had just learned. My parents had stolen my identity to finance a luxury car, forging my signature on loan documents and opening a bank account in my name. The monthly payments were destroying my debt-to-income ratio and would prevent me from qualifying for a mortgage or any other major purchases. Worse yet, if they missed even one payment, my credit score would be devastated, potentially taking years to repair. The betrayal cut deeper than any financial damage could. These were the people who had taught me about financial responsibility, who had proudly celebrated my academic achievements, who had seemed so supportive of my independence and success. They had looked me in the eye for months while driving a car purchased with my stolen identity, letting me praise their smart financial decisions while they systematically destroyed my creditworthiness. I spent the next several hours calling credit agencies, banks, and trying to understand the full scope of the fraud. The checking account they had opened in my name showed regular automatic payments to Southwest Auto Finance, but the money was being transferred from Carlos's business account. They were making the payments, but the debt was entirely in my name, affecting my credit profile and limiting my financial options. The most devastating realization was that this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a desperate act during a financial emergency. This had been planned and executed over several months, requiring forged documents, false employment verification, and ongoing deception. They had celebrated their successful purchase while knowing they had stolen my financial future to fund their lifestyle. When I finally stopped crying and started thinking clearly, I knew I had to confront them immediately. Every day I waited would be another day of damage to my credit, and another month of payments on a debt I had never agreed to assume. I also realized that if they had done this once, there might be other fraudulent accounts or debts I hadn't discovered yet. The drive to my parents' house felt surreal, knowing that I was about to accuse the two people who raised me of a serious crime. Part of me hoped there was some explanation, some misunderstanding that would make this all make sense. But the evidence was clear, and deep down, I knew exactly what they had done and why they had done it. As I pulled into their driveway behind the pearl white Lexus, I felt a mixture of rage, heartbreak, and determination. This confrontation would either result in them making this right immediately, or it would be the end of our relationship as I knew it. Either way, I was done being their victim, and I was going to get my life back no matter what it cost. Walking up to my childhood home that evening, I noticed details I had somehow missed before. The landscaping was immaculate, but I could see where corners had been cut. The expensive-looking outdoor furniture was actually well-maintained pieces from several years ago rather than new purchases. The house itself needed paint in spots that weren't immediately visible from the street. These weren't the choices of people with unlimited resources, but rather the careful maintenance of appearances by people stretching their budget to its limits. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key, needing to establish that this wasn't a casual family visit. Linda answered with her usual bright smile, though something in her eyes flickered when she saw my expression. She was wearing one of her designer blouses, perfectly pressed as always, but I noticed it was one I remembered from my high school years. Carlos appeared behind her, his salesman's smile automatically engaging as he welcomed me inside. Their living room showcased the same careful balance between luxury and economy I had just observed outside. The leather furniture was beautiful, but showed signs of professional cleaning and conditioning rather than replacement. The artwork on the walls was tasteful, but consisted largely of pieces they had owned for years. Fresh flowers sat in an expensive vase, but they were grocery store bouquets arranged to look more sophisticated than their origins. I declined their offers of dinner and drinks, instead asking them to sit down because I needed to discuss something important. Linda's nervous energy immediately increased, and she began straightening already perfectly arranged throw pillows. Carlos maintained his composed demeanor, but I caught him exchanging a quick glance with Linda that seemed loaded with meaning. When I told them about the auto loan I had discovered in my name, their reactions confirmed my worst fears. Linda's face went completely pale, and she looked like she might be sick. Carlos, however, went into damage control mode immediately, his sales training kicking in as he attempted to manage the situation. He started explaining about temporary cash flow problems and how they had planned to refinance the loan into their names once their credit situations improved. The explanations felt rehearsed, as if they had prepared for this moment. Carlos talked about market fluctuations affecting his commission structure and unexpected expenses related to Miguel's legal troubles. Linda chimed in about real estate market changes and how they had been caught in a temporary financial squeeze. They painted themselves as victims of circumstances beyond their control, forced into desperate measures by forces they couldn't have anticipated. What struck me most was how quickly they shifted from surprise to justification, as if they had been waiting for this conversation and had their talking points ready. Carlos emphasized that they were making all the payments on time, that my credit wasn't being damaged, and that they would have everything sorted out within a few months. Linda tearfully explained how embarrassed they were about their financial situation and how they hadn't wanted to burden me with their problems during my transition to professional life. As they spoke, memories began surfacing of moments that now seemed significant in retrospect. I remembered Carlos asking detailed questions about my salary and benefits package, claiming he wanted to help me negotiate better terms. I recalled Linda's interest in my apartment lease and whether I had established banking relationships in my own name. There had been a dinner conversation about identity theft and how important it was to monitor credit reports, during which Carlos had seemed unusually knowledgeable about credit reporting agencies and dispute processes. The more I thought about their behavior over the past year, the clearer the pattern became. They had been gathering information about my financial situation, credit score, and employment status for months before opening the fraudulent loan. The timing wasn't coincidental either. They had waited until I was established in my career and had built good credit, maximizing their chances of loan approval while minimizing the likelihood that I would discover the fraud quickly. Carlos's explanation about planning to refinance the loan rang hollow when I considered the math. The Lexus was depreciating rapidly, and they would need excellent credit to qualify for an unsecured loan large enough to pay off the auto loan. Given their obvious financial stress, their credit was likely declining rather than improving. They had no realistic plan for removing my name from this debt, which meant they had always intended for me to either remain liable or discover the fraud and be forced to deal with the consequences. Linda's tears seemed genuine, but they were tears of self-pity rather than remorse for what they had done to me. She kept talking about how humiliating it was to admit their financial struggles, and how they had hoped to resolve everything before I found out. There was no acknowledgement of the violation of trust, no recognition of the potential damage to my financial future, and no real apology for stealing my identity. During this conversation, Miguel came home from his part-time job at a local restaurant. His reaction to the tension in the room was telling. Rather than seeming surprised by the serious discussion, he appeared uncomfortable, as if he knew something about the situation. When Carlos briefly explained that they were discussing some financial matters, Miguel quickly excused himself and went to his room. His hurried exit suggested this wasn't the first time financial stress had created family drama. As the evening progressed, more details emerged about the depth of their financial problems. Carlos admitted that his company had indeed restructured, significantly reducing his commission potential. Linda revealed that a real estate license was at risk due to some compliance issues that had resulted in fines and additional training requirements. Miguel's legal troubles had cost them over $15,000 in attorney's fees and court costs, money they had borrowed against Carlos's retirement account. The picture that emerged was of a family that had been living beyond their means for years, maintaining their lifestyle through increasingly creative financial maneuvers. They had refinanced their house multiple times, exhausted their home equity line of credit, and maximized their credit cards. The luxury cars they drove were financed with extended terms that left them underwater on both loans. My identity theft wasn't a desperate last resort, but rather the next logical step in their pattern of financial irresponsibility. Carlos attempted to frame their actions as a family investment, arguing that maintaining their lifestyle and social standing ultimately benefited everyone, including me. He talked about business opportunities that depended on projecting success and how damaging it would be to their professional reputations if they had to downsize visibly. Linda supported this narrative, mentioning specific social and business connections that required them to maintain certain appearances. Their rationalization strategy involved minimizing the impact on me while maximizing their own victimization. They repeatedly emphasized that they were making the payments, as if this somehow negated the identity theft. They painted themselves as loving parents who had made a difficult decision to protect the family's financial stability during a temporary crisis. They expressed confidence that their situations would improve soon, allowing them to refinance the loan and remove my name from the debt. When I asked directly why they hadn't simply asked me for help instead of stealing my identity, their answers revealed the true depths of their entitlement and manipulation. Carlos claimed they hadn't wanted to burden me during my career transition, but this explanation crumbled when I pointed out that asking for help would have been infinitely less burdensome than discovering identity theft. Linda suggested they had been protecting me from having to make difficult decisions about family loyalty versus financial prudence. The real reason became clear as the conversation continued. They knew I would never have agreed to co-sign for a luxury car while they were experiencing financial difficulties. They knew I would have suggested they purchase a reliable used vehicle instead of financing an expensive new Lexus. They knew I would have insisted on understanding their complete financial picture before agreeing to any arrangement that put my credit at risk. They had stolen my identity precisely because they knew I would have made responsible decisions that conflicted with their desires. As midnight approached, I realized this conversation was accomplishing nothing except confirming what I already knew. My parents had committed a serious crime, they had no realistic plan for making it right, and they were more concerned with managing the consequences than acknowledging the harm they had caused. Their primary focus was on maintaining their lifestyle and protecting their reputations, rather than repairing the damage to our relationship or my financial future. The most painful realization was that this betrayal wasn't an aberration, but rather the culmination of a long pattern of prioritizing appearances over substance, short-term gratification over long-term consequences, and their own comfort over my well-being. The financial education Carlos had provided during my teenage years hadn't been about preparing me for success, but rather about grooming me to be a useful financial resource when they needed one. When I finally left that night, I understood that my parents were fundamentally different people than I had believed them to be. The loving, supportive, financially responsible adults who had raised me were largely fictional characters they had played while it served their purposes. The real Carlos and Linda Martinez were people willing to steal their daughter's identity to maintain their lifestyle, then manipulate and gaslight her when confronted with their crimes. Driving back to my apartment, I began developing the first outlines of a plan. Simply demanding that they refinance the loan wasn't sufficient, partly because they likely couldn't qualify for the credit needed, but primarily because it wouldn't address the fundamental violation of trust and the potential for future financial abuse. I needed to protect myself completely while ensuring they faced real consequences for their actions. The next morning, I started a detailed investigation into the full scope of their identity theft. I pulled comprehensive credit reports from all 3 major agencies, looking for any other fraudulent accounts or inquiries. I contacted my employer's Human Resources Department to understand whether any unauthorized employment verifications had been conducted. I called my bank to verify that no one else had attempted to access my accounts or request additional services in my name. What I discovered was both relieving and infuriating. The auto loan appeared to be the only fraudulent account, but the paper trail revealed extensive planning and preparation. Someone had called my employer multiple times to verify my employment status, salary, and benefits. There had been credit inquiries from several auto financing companies before Southwest Auto Finance approved the loan. They had shopped around to find the best terms, using my credit profile to secure financing they could never have obtained with their own financial information. The forged documents were sophisticated enough to pass initial scrutiny, but sloppy enough to reveal clear evidence of fraud upon closer inspection. My signature on the loan application was a reasonable approximation, but differed from my actual signature in several subtle ways. The employment verification form contained information about my job that I had never shared with my parents, suggesting they had conducted research or made additional unauthorized inquiries. Most damaging of all was the discovery that they had opened a checking account in my name at a different bank, using a fake identification document with my name and their address. This account was being used to facilitate the automatic loan payments. But it also represented a separate identity theft charge and demonstrated the premeditated nature of their crimes. They hadn't stumbled into this situation during a moment of desperation, but had planned and executed a comprehensive identity theft scheme over several months. Armed with this evidence, I consulted with a consumer protection attorney who specialized in identity theft cases. She explained that I had several options, ranging from working with the credit agencies to remove the fraudulent accounts to filing criminal charges against my parents. She also warned me that family identity theft cases were often complicated by emotional considerations and that I needed to be prepared for the possibility that pursuing justice might permanently destroy my relationships with my parents and potentially other family members. The attorney helped me understand the long-term implications of each possible course of action. If I simply worked with the creditors to remove my name from the accounts, my parents would likely face immediate demands for full payment of the loan balance, which they couldn't afford. This could result in repossession of the vehicle, destruction of their credit, and potential legal action from the lender. If I filed criminal charges, they could face felony convictions, fines, and possible jail time. But I would have a stronger legal position for ensuring the fraudulent accounts were completely removed from my credit reports. The most important thing the attorney told me was that I needed to act quickly and decisively. Every month I delayed taking action was another month of damage to my credit profile, and another month that my parents could potentially claim I had given them permission to use my credit. The longer I waited, the more difficult it would become to prove that I was truly a victim of identity theft, rather than a willing participant who had later changed her mind. That night, I made the decision that would define the next phase of my life. I was going to file criminal charges against my parents, work with the creditors to remove all fraudulent accounts from my credit reports, and take possession of the vehicle they had purchased with my stolen identity. They had made their choice when they decided to steal from me rather than ask for help. Now I was making mine, and I was choosing to protect my future over preserving their comfort. The following Monday morning, I walked into the Phoenix Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit with a folder containing every piece of evidence I had gathered over the weekend. Detective Maria Santos, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened patiently as I explained the situation. She had clearly handled family identity theft cases before, because she asked specific questions about the timeline, the forged documents, and my relationship with my parents that demonstrated deep familiarity with these types of crimes. Detective Santos explained that financial crimes involving family members were unfortunately common, often more sophisticated than stranger identity theft, because family members had access to personal information and could more easily forge signatures and personal details. She warned me that prosecuting family members was emotionally difficult, and that my parents would likely hire attorneys who would try to paint me as a vindictive daughter seeking revenge over family disagreements. The detective photographed all my documentation, took detailed statements about my discovery of the fraud and my confrontation with my parents, and explained the next steps in the investigation. She would contact Southwest Auto Finance to obtain copies of all loan documents, verify the forged signatures with handwriting experts, and interview my parents about their actions. She estimated that the investigation would take several weeks, during which time I should avoid any contact with my parents that wasn't absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, I began the process of disputing the fraudulent accounts with all 3 credit reporting agencies. Each agency required detailed affidavits, police report numbers, and supporting documentation proving that I was a victim of identity theft rather than someone trying to escape legitimate debts. The paperwork was overwhelming, and the process felt designed to discourage people from pursuing these claims, but I was determined to clear my name completely. The most challenging part of this process was dealing with Southwest Auto Finance directly. Their fraud department initially seemed skeptical of my claims, particularly when they learned that the perpetrators were my parents, and that they had been making payments on time. The customer service representative suggested that this seemed like a family dispute rather than criminal identity theft, implying that I might have given permission initially and changed my mind later. I had to be transferred through multiple departments before reaching someone who understood the legal implications of what had happened. Even then, the company seemed more concerned with protecting their financial interests than with helping me resolve the fraud. They wanted assurance that they would be able to recover the vehicle or the loan balance before they would agree to remove my name from the account. During this time, my parents attempted to contact me multiple times. Linda left tearful voicemails apologizing for not handling the situation better and begging me to call her back so we could work everything out as a family. Carlos sent text messages alternating between remorse and anger, sometimes apologizing for their mistakes, and other times accusing me of overreacting and trying to destroy the family over a misunderstanding. Miguel called me directly one evening, clearly having been recruited by our parents to serve as an intermediary. He explained that Carlos and Linda were devastated by my reaction and desperate to find a solution that would repair our relationship. He suggested that filing criminal charges was an extreme response that would hurt everyone involved, including me, since having parents with criminal records would reflect poorly on my professional reputation. The conversation with Miguel revealed how deeply my parents had manipulated the narrative within our family. He genuinely believed that they had made a mistake during a desperate financial crisis, and that I was being unreasonably punitive in my response. He had no understanding of the legal implications of identity theft, the long-term damage to my credit, or the fundamental violation of trust that their actions represented. When I tried to explain the seriousness of what our parents had done, Miguel seemed to think I was exaggerating the consequences for dramatic effect. He pointed out that they were making the payments and argued that no real harm had been done since my credit score hadn't decreased. His inability to grasp the situation demonstrated how effectively Carlos and Linda had framed themselves as victims and me as the unreasonable aggressor. 2 weeks after filing the police report, Detective Santos called with updates on her investigation. The handwriting analysis had confirmed that my signature on the loan documents was forged, and the employment verification had been conducted using false pretenses. Southwest Auto Finance had provided additional documentation showing that the loan application contained several misrepresentations, including claiming that I lived at my parents' address and had requested the automatic payment setup from their checking account. More significantly, the detective had uncovered evidence that this wasn't my parents' first experience with financial fraud. Carlos had been investigated several years earlier for submitting false information on a business loan application, though charges were never filed due to insufficient evidence. Linda had been involved in a real estate transaction that resulted in accusations of document falsification, though that case had also been resolved without criminal charges. This pattern of behavior suggested that my identity theft wasn't an aberrant act of desperation, but rather part of a longer history of financial dishonesty. The detective explained that this background would strengthen the criminal case, but also indicated that my parents were likely more sophisticated in their financial crimes than I had realized. They probably understood the legal implications of their actions and had chosen to proceed anyway, calculating that family loyalty would protect them from consequences. The breakthrough in my case came when Detective Santos discovered that my parents had attempted to use my identity for additional fraudulent transactions. They had applied for a department store credit card in my name, though that application had been denied due to the existing auto loan affecting my debt-to-income ratio. They had also made inquiries about adding me as an authorized user on one of their credit cards, presumably to access my credit line for their expenses. These additional attempts demonstrated that stealing my identity wasn't a one-time mistake, but rather an ongoing strategy they had planned to continue using. If I hadn't discovered the auto loan when I did, they would likely have opened multiple fraudulent accounts, potentially destroying my credit entirely. The detective pointed out that this evidence of intent would make the criminal charges much more serious than simple identity theft. Armed with this new information, I felt more confident about my decision to pursue criminal charges. My parents hadn't made a desperate mistake during a financial crisis. They had deliberately chosen to steal my identity as part of a long-term plan to access credit they couldn't qualify for themselves. They had planned to continue using my credit for their benefit, regardless of the impact on my financial future. The next phase of my plan involved taking possession of the vehicle they had purchased with my stolen identity. Since the loan was in my name and I had documentation proving that I was a victim of identity theft, I had the legal right to take control of the collateral. However, the logistics of actually retrieving the car from my parents' driveway required careful planning and professional assistance. I contacted a repossession company that specialized in complicated recovery situations. The owner, Jake Morrison, had experience with family disputes and legal gray areas, where standard repossession procedures might not apply. He explained that I would need court documentation establishing my right to the vehicle, but once I had that paperwork, his team could recover the car quickly and efficiently. The legal process for establishing my right to the vehicle was more complex than I had anticipated. Even though the loan was fraudulently obtained, the car was currently in my parents' possession, and they could argue that they had been making payments and using the vehicle with my implied consent. I needed a court order that clearly established the fraudulent nature of the loan and my right to take possession of the collateral. My attorney filed an emergency motion requesting immediate possession of the vehicle, arguing that my parents were likely to hide, sell, or damage the car if they learned about my intentions in advance. The motion included all the evidence of identity theft, the police investigation findings, and documentation of their attempts to commit additional fraud using my identity. The judge scheduled a hearing for the following week, giving my parents just enough time to be notified, but not enough time to dispose of the vehicle. During this waiting period, the tension with my family reached a breaking point. Carlos called me directly, abandoning any pretense of remorse and moving straight to threats and intimidation. He accused me of being an ungrateful daughter, who was trying to destroy the family that had sacrificed everything for my success. He claimed that filing criminal charges would ruin their lives and make it impossible for them to recover financially from their current difficulties. The most revealing part of Carlos's angry phone call was his assertion that I owed them compensation for raising me and funding my education. He argued that the money they had spent on my upbringing gave them the right to access my credit when they needed it. This twisted logic revealed the fundamental selfishness underlying their actions and their complete inability to understand why identity theft was wrong, regardless of the family relationship. Linda's approach was different, but equally manipulative. She focused on emotional appeals, talking about how much they loved me and how devastated she was that money had come between us. She claimed that prosecuting them would destroy not just their lives but also Miguel's future, since having parents with criminal records would affect his college and career prospects. She painted herself as a heartbroken mother who couldn't understand how her daughter had become so cold and vindictive. The emotional manipulation was exhausting, but it also strengthened my resolve. Both of my parents were more concerned with avoiding consequences than with acknowledging the harm they had caused or taking steps to make amends. They wanted me to absorb the financial damage and pretend nothing had happened so they could continue their lifestyle without interruption. Their complete lack of genuine remorse confirmed that I was making the right decision in pursuing criminal charges. The court hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, and I arrived with my attorney and all supporting documentation. My parents appeared with their own lawyer, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crimes. Their lawyer's strategy was exactly what Detective Santos had predicted, portraying this as a family disagreement rather than serious criminal behavior. The defense attorney argued that my parents had been making all payments on time, that no actual financial harm had occurred, and that family members often help each other with credit applications during difficult times. He suggested that I had been aware of the loan arrangement initially and was now using technicalities to punish my parents over unrelated family conflicts. My attorney countered with the evidence of forged documents, false employment verification, and the additional fraudulent credit applications that demonstrated ongoing criminal intent. She emphasized that identity theft was a serious felony regardless of family relationships, and that allowing family members to commit financial crimes without consequences would set a dangerous precedent. The judge reviewed all the evidence carefully before ruling in my favor. He found that the loan had been obtained through clear identity theft, that I had never given permission for my credit to be used, and that I had the right to take immediate possession of the vehicle as the legal borrower. He also noted that the pattern of fraudulent activity suggested this was not an isolated incident of poor judgment, but rather deliberate criminal behavior. Outside the courthouse, my parents' reaction was a mixture of rage and panic. Carlos accused me of betraying the family and predicted that I would regret my actions when I needed their help in the future. Linda cried and begged me to reconsider, claiming that losing the car would make it impossible for her to work and earn money to pay back what they owed. Neither of them seemed to understand that their financial problems were not my responsibility, and that stealing my identity was not an acceptable solution to their difficulties. That afternoon, I met with Jake Morrison to plan the vehicle recovery. He explained that the best time to repossess the car would be when my parents were away from home, reducing the possibility of confrontation or interference. He also suggested that I should be present during the recovery to handle any questions about ownership and to ensure that all personal items were properly handled. As we discussed logistics, Jake mentioned that my parents had called his office earlier that day, apparently having learned about my plans through their attorney. They had threatened legal action if he attempted to take their car, and had implied that they would physically resist any repossession attempts. This information confirmed that they had no intention of voluntarily surrendering the vehicle and were prepared to escalate the conflict further. The timing of the recovery became crucial when I learned that my parents were planning a large celebration for their 25th wedding anniversary the following weekend. Linda had been organizing this party for months, inviting extended family, friends, and Carlos's business associates for an elaborate backyard celebration. The guest list included many of the people they had been trying to impress with their lifestyle, making this the perfect opportunity to expose the truth about their financial crimes. I realized that repossessing the car during their anniversary party would accomplish multiple goals simultaneously. It would ensure that my parents couldn't hide or dispose of the vehicle beforehand. It would demonstrate the consequences of their actions to their entire social circle, and it would provide the dramatic confrontation that would finally force them to face reality about what they had done. The decision to time the repossession for maximum impact wasn't motivated by vindictiveness but by strategic necessity. My parents had spent years building their reputation on financial success that was largely fraudulent. Their willingness to steal my identity to maintain their lifestyle showed that they cared more about appearances than about right and wrong. The only way to ensure that they faced real consequences was to make those consequences visible to the people whose opinions they valued most. As I finalized plans for the repossession, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. This confrontation would mark the end of my relationship with my parents as I had known it, but it would also represent the beginning of my complete independence from their manipulation and financial irresponsibility. They had forced this choice when they decided to steal my identity, and now they would have to live with the consequences of their actions in front of everyone who mattered to them. The week leading up to my parents' anniversary party felt like preparing for battle. Every detail had to be perfectly coordinated to ensure the repossession went smoothly, and that I would finally get justice for what they had done to me. Jake Morrison and I met twice more to review the logistics, timing, and legal documentation that would be required. He had handled similar situations before, but he admitted that family dynamics added complications that made standard repossession procedures more unpredictable. My biggest concern was ensuring that the repossession was completely legal and properly documented. The last thing I wanted was to give my parents any opportunity to claim that I had stolen their car or acted improperly. Jake assured me that we had all the necessary court orders and documentation, but he also warned me that my parents might try to physically interfere or call the police to report the vehicle as stolen. To prepare for these possibilities, Jake coordinated with the Phoenix Police Department to ensure that officers would be available if needed during the repossession. Detective Santos had briefed the patrol division about the ongoing identity theft case and the court order authorizing the vehicle recovery. If my parents called 911 claiming their car was being stolen, the responding officers would already understand the legal situation and could prevent any interference with the legitimate repossession. I also had to prepare myself emotionally for what was about to happen. This wasn't just about recovering a stolen vehicle. It was about publicly exposing my parents' crimes in front of everyone they had been trying to impress. The guest list for their anniversary party included Carlos's business colleagues, Linda's real estate clients, neighbors, extended family members, and longtime friends. These were the people whose opinions mattered most to my parents, and seeing them lose their luxury car during their celebration would destroy the carefully maintained image they had built over decades. Part of me felt guilty about the public humiliation they would experience, but I reminded myself that they had created this situation through their own choices. They had stolen my identity, forged my signature, and destroyed my credit to fund their lifestyle. They had shown no genuine remorse when confronted, and had tried to manipulate me into accepting responsibility for their crimes. They had forced me to take legal action to protect my financial future, and now they would have to face the consequences of their decisions. The anniversary party was scheduled to begin at 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, with most guests expected to arrive between 2 and 3. Linda had been posting updates on social media for weeks, showing off the elaborate decorations, catered food, and expensive wine selection she had arranged. The guest list had grown to over 60 people, making this one of the largest social events my parents had ever hosted. Jake and I decided to wait until the party was in full swing before beginning the repossession. We wanted to ensure that most of the guests had arrived, and that my parents would be occupied with hosting duties, making it less likely that they would notice our arrival until it was too late to interfere. We also wanted maximum visibility for the consequences of their actions, ensuring that their entire social circle would witness the reality behind their fraudulent lifestyle. On Friday evening, I drove past my parents' house to observe their party preparations. The backyard was decorated with string lights, rented tables and chairs, and elaborate floral arrangements. A catering truck was parked in the driveway, and Linda was directing the setup with her usual attention to detail. The pearl-white Lexus sat prominently in front of the house, freshly washed and detailed for the celebration. Seeing that car, purchased with my stolen identity, sitting there like a symbol of their success made my anger flare again. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and perfect weather for an outdoor celebration. I spent the morning reviewing all my documentation one final time and preparing for the possibility that this confrontation might permanently end my relationship with my parents and potentially other family members. Extended family would likely take sides, and I might find myself cut off from cousins, aunts, and uncles who believed my parents' version of events. I met Jake and his assistant, Tony, at a gas station about a mile from my parents' house at 1:30. Both men were dressed professionally and carried themselves with the calm confidence of people who handled difficult situations regularly. Jake reviewed the legal documents with me one more time, explaining exactly what would happen and what my role would be during the repossession process. The plan was straightforward but required precise timing. Tony would drive the tow truck and position it in front of my parents' house while Jake and I approached the front door to formally notify them of the repossession. If they refused to surrender the keys voluntarily, Tony would hook up the vehicle and tow it away, while Jake and I handled any confrontation or interference. I would be present to answer any questions about ownership and to ensure that the legal process was properly followed. At exactly 2:15, we drove slowly past my parents' house to assess the situation. The party was clearly underway, with cars lining both sides of Saguaro Drive and guests visible in the backyard through the side gate. The Lexus was still parked in its prominent position near the front entrance, almost as if it were part of the party decorations. The sound of conversation and laughter carried from the backyard, where my parents were presumably playing their roles as successful hosts celebrating their happy marriage. Jake positioned his truck around the corner, while Tony drove the tow truck directly to my parents' house. The massive vehicle was impossible to miss, and I saw several party guests pointing and looking confused as Tony maneuvered into position. Jake and I walked calmly to the front door, with me carrying the folder containing all legal documentation and Jake prepared to handle any resistance or confrontation. Linda answered the door, wearing an elegant cocktail dress and her biggest smile, clearly expecting another party guest. Her expression changed instantly when she saw me, and the color drained from her face when she noticed Jake standing beside me in his professional attire. Behind her, I could hear the sounds of the party continuing in the backyard, with Carlos's voice carrying as he told stories to his business associates. Before Linda could speak, I handed her the court order and explained that I was there to recover the vehicle that had been fraudulently purchased using my identity. Jake introduced himself as the recovery agent and explained that we had legal authority to take immediate possession of the Lexus. Linda's initial shock quickly turned to panic as she realized what was happening and what it would mean for their party and their reputation. She tried to close the door and insisted that we couldn't do this during their anniversary celebration, but Jake calmly explained that the court order was valid regardless of the timing, and that interfering with a legal repossession would result in additional criminal charges. Linda's voice rose as she called for Carlos, bringing him quickly from the backyard with several curious guests following behind him. Carlos's reaction was explosive. His salesman's composure completely disappeared as he saw the tow truck in his driveway and realized that his carefully orchestrated celebration was about to become a public humiliation. He immediately began shouting about harassment and illegal seizure, threatening to call the police and demanding that we leave his property immediately. Jake remained completely calm, explaining the legal situation and offering to contact the police himself if Carlos preferred to have official verification of our authority. By this time, the commotion had attracted the attention of most of the party guests. People were coming from the backyard to see what was happening, and neighbors were emerging from their houses to observe the unusual scene. I could see the exact moment when Carlos realized that his reputation was being destroyed in front of everyone who mattered to him professionally and socially. Linda tried a different approach, pulling me aside and begging me to postpone the repossession until after their guests had left. She offered to voluntarily surrender the keys later that evening if I would just allow them to finish their celebration without this public embarrassment. Her desperation was palpable, but I reminded her that they had created this situation through their own criminal actions, and that I was simply exercising my legal rights as the victim of their identity theft. Meanwhile, Tony had efficiently connected the tow equipment to the Lexus and was preparing to lift the vehicle onto his truck. Several party guests were now openly staring and whispering among themselves, clearly trying to understand what was happening and why someone was repossessing the host's car during their anniversary party. Carlos's business colleagues looked particularly uncomfortable, as this scene was completely incompatible with the successful image he had cultivated in their professional relationships. Carlos made one final desperate attempt to stop the repossession by claiming that he had been making all the payments and that taking the car would constitute theft. Jake patiently explained that the loan had been obtained through identity theft, that I was the legal borrower according to all documentation, and that Carlos's payment history was irrelevant to the question of legal ownership. He also pointed out that Carlos was admitting to using a fraudulently obtained vehicle, which would constitute additional criminal activity. As the Lexus was lifted onto the tow truck, the reality of the situation finally sank in for both my parents. This wasn't just about losing their car, it was about the complete exposure of their financial fraud in front of their entire social circle. Every guest at their anniversary party was witnessing the consequences of their criminal behavior, and there would be no way to maintain their carefully constructed image after this public humiliation. Linda began crying openly, not just from embarrassment, but from the realization that their lifestyle and social standing were collapsing in real time. Carlos stood silently, watching his car being loaded onto the tow truck, his face a mixture of rage and defeat. Several guests had pulled out their phones to record the scene, ensuring that this moment would be preserved and likely shared throughout their social networks. Miguel appeared from the backyard, having heard the commotion and come to investigate. His shocked expression when he saw what was happening revealed that my parents hadn't warned him about the possibility of vehicle repossession. He looked between me, our parents, and the crowd of confused guests, clearly trying to understand how a family celebration had turned into this public catastrophe. As Tony secured the vehicle and prepared to drive away, several of Carlos's business associates approached him with obvious concerns about what they had just witnessed. I could hear fragments of their conversations as they asked about financial difficulties and whether there were problems with his business operations. The professional relationships he had worked years to build were being damaged by the public exposure of his personal financial crimes. Linda's sister Maria, who had traveled from California for the anniversary celebration, confronted me directly about what I was doing to my own parents during their special day. She accused me of being vindictive and cruel, arguing that family problems should be handled privately rather than through public humiliation. I calmly explained that my parents had stolen my identity to purchase the car and that I was simply recovering property that legally belonged to me. Maria's shock at learning about the identity theft was visible, and I could see her reevaluating everything she thought she knew about Carlos and Linda's financial situation. She began asking pointed questions about their business dealings and whether they had ever borrowed money under false pretenses. The ripple effects of their exposure were spreading quickly through their extended family and social network. As the tow truck pulled away with the Lexus secured on its bed, the anniversary party effectively ended. Guests began making excuses about other commitments and leaving in small groups, clearly uncomfortable with the situation and uncertain about what they had witnessed. The elaborate celebration that was supposed to showcase my parents' successful marriage and prosperous lifestyle had instead become a public demonstration of their criminal behavior and financial irresponsibility. Carlos retreated into the house without speaking to anyone, leaving Linda to handle the social fallout with their remaining guests. She attempted damage control by suggesting that there had been some kind of misunderstanding about the car loan, but her explanations were vague and unconvincing. The evidence of what had happened was too clear, and most guests seemed eager to distance themselves from what was obviously a serious legal situation. I stayed long enough to ensure that the repossession was completed successfully and that my parents understood they could not report the vehicle as stolen or attempt to interfere with my legal ownership. Jake provided them with copies of all relevant documentation and contact information for any questions about the recovery process. He also reminded them that any attempts to retaliate or interfere would result in additional criminal charges. As I prepared to leave, Miguel approached me one final time, his earlier defensiveness replaced by genuine confusion and hurt. He asked why I hadn't found some way to resolve this situation privately, away from their guests and extended family. I explained that our parents had committed serious crimes, had shown no genuine remorse when confronted, and had left me no choice but to pursue legal remedies to protect my financial future. The conversation with Miguel was painful, because I could see that he was finally beginning to understand the seriousness of what Carlos and Linda had done. His loyalty to our parents was being challenged by the undeniable evidence of their criminal behavior, and he was struggling to reconcile the people he thought he knew with the reality of their actions. I gave him my contact information and told him that I hoped we could maintain a relationship separate from our parents' problems. Driving away from my childhood home, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that I had finally taken control of the situation and recovered the vehicle purchased with my stolen identity. Satisfaction that my parents had faced real consequences for their actions in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to them. Sadness that our family relationships had been destroyed by their choices and their refusal to take responsibility for their criminal behavior. The repossession represented more than just recovering stolen property. It was a public declaration that I would not allow myself to be victimized by financial abuse, even from family members. The timing during their anniversary party ensured that the consequences of their actions were visible to their entire social circle, making it impossible for them to maintain their fraudulent lifestyle or continue manipulating others through false representations of their financial success. Over the following days, the full impact of the public repossession became clear. Carlos's business relationships suffered, as colleagues questioned his integrity and financial stability. Linda lost several real estate clients who were concerned about her involvement in identity theft. Their social standing in the neighborhood and church community was permanently damaged by the public exposure of their criminal behavior. Miguel called me several times during that week, asking questions about the identity theft and trying to understand how our parents had reached the point of stealing from their own daughter. He revealed that they had been asking him for money regularly, claiming temporary cash flow problems that would be resolved soon. He was beginning to realize that their financial difficulties were much more serious than they had admitted, and that their requests for help might continue indefinitely. The criminal case against my parents proceeded quickly once Detective Santos had all the evidence from the repossession and the loan documentation. Carlos and Linda were formally charged with identity theft, forgery, and fraud, with potential penalties including significant fines and jail time. Their attorney negotiated a plea agreement that required them to pay restitution for all costs associated with resolving the fraudulent accounts and to complete community service. But they avoided prison sentences due to their lack of serious criminal history. Southwest Auto Finance expedited the process of removing my name from the fraudulent loan once they had clear evidence of the identity theft and court documentation establishing my ownership of the vehicle. My credit reports were corrected to remove all references to the fraudulent accounts, and my credit score returned to its previous level within 60 days of the repossession. The Lexus itself became a symbol of my newfound independence and determination to protect my financial future. I kept the vehicle for several months, partly because I needed reliable transportation, but mainly because driving it reminded me that I had successfully stood up to financial abuse and refused to be victimized by people who were supposed to protect me. Eventually, I sold the car and used the proceeds to make a down payment on a small house, converting the symbol of my parents' betrayal into the foundation of my own financial security. The anniversary party repossession marked the end of my relationship with my parents as I had known it, but it also represented the beginning of my complete independence from their manipulation and financial irresponsibility. They had taught me that family loyalty could not excuse criminal behavior, and that protecting my own future was more important than preserving relationships built on deception and abuse. 2 years have passed since that unforgettable anniversary party, and my life has transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The small house I purchased with the proceeds from selling the Lexus sits in a quiet neighborhood in Tempe, surrounded by young professionals and families who value honesty and hard work over flashy displays of wealth. Every morning when I unlock my front door, I'm reminded that this home belongs entirely to me, purchased with money I earned and credit I built through legitimate means. My career flourished once the cloud of fraudulent debt was removed from my credit profile. The promotion I had been working toward finally came through, along with a substantial salary increase that allowed me to accelerate my student loan payments and start building real wealth. My manager, Sarah Chen, became aware of my situation through my need for employment verification documents during the legal proceedings, and her support throughout that difficult period strengthened our professional relationship immeasurably. The financial education I received through necessity during my identity theft case led me to become something of an expert on credit protection and fraud prevention. I began volunteering with a nonprofit organization that helps identity theft victims navigate the complex process of restoring their credit and financial standing. Speaking to groups of people who had experienced similar betrayals, I found purpose in transforming my painful experience into practical help for others facing the same challenges. My relationship with Miguel evolved slowly but significantly during these 2 years. Initially, he struggled to accept that our parents were capable of serious criminal behavior, but the evidence was overwhelming, and their continued financial irresponsibility after the criminal case made it impossible for him to maintain his illusions. He began setting boundaries with Carlos and Linda, refusing their requests for loans and declining to serve as an intermediary in their attempts to reconcile with me. Miguel eventually moved out of our parents' house and into his own apartment, citing the need for independence but privately acknowledging that living with them had become emotionally exhausting. He started therapy to process the family dynamics he had grown up accepting as normal, and our conversations gradually shifted from defending our parents to understanding how their behavior had affected both of us throughout our lives. The criminal case against Carlos and Linda concluded with their guilty pleas to reduced charges, avoiding jail time but requiring them to pay significant fines and complete hundreds of hours of community service. Their attorney negotiated the plea agreement partly by emphasizing their cooperation in resolving the fraudulent accounts and their lack of prior serious criminal convictions, but the felony convictions remained on their records permanently. The financial consequences for my parents extended far beyond the legal penalties. Carlos lost several major clients who were concerned about his integrity and reliability, forcing him to accept a lower-paying position with a different company. Linda's real estate license was suspended for 6 months pending an ethics investigation, and she struggled to rebuild her client base even after reinstatement. Their lifestyle contracted dramatically as they were forced to sell their house and move to a modest rental apartment. The social consequences proved equally devastating. Their church community, neighborhood associations, and professional networks all learned about their criminal convictions through news coverage and word of mouth. Many longtime friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the revelation that people they had known for years were capable of stealing from their own daughter. The carefully constructed image they had maintained for decades was permanently shattered. Linda made several attempts to contact me during the first year after the repossession, alternating between tearful apologies and angry accusations that I had overreacted to their mistake. Her messages revealed a continued inability to understand the seriousness of identity theft or accept responsibility for the harm they had caused. She seemed to believe that enough time had passed for me to forgive and forget, allowing our family to return to its previous dynamics. Carlos's approach was different but equally ineffective. He sent formal letters through his attorney, proposing various arrangements for reconciliation that always involved me dropping the criminal charges or providing financial assistance to help them recover from their legal troubles. His proposals demonstrated the same transactional thinking that had led to the identity theft in the first place, treating family relationships as business arrangements that could be negotiated rather than personal bonds built on trust and respect. I responded to neither parent's overtures, having learned through therapy and support groups that reconciliation requires genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing and demonstrated change in behavior. Their communications showed no evidence of real remorse or understanding of how their actions had affected me. They seemed more concerned with repairing their damaged reputations than with rebuilding our relationships on healthier foundations. The Yunnan-Tom therapy I began during the legal proceedings continued well beyond the resolution of the criminal case. Dr. Amanda Foster specialized in family trauma and financial abuse, helping me understand the long-term psychological effects of growing up in a household where manipulation and deception were normal. Through our sessions, I recognized patterns in my relationships and decision-making that reflected my childhood adaptation to an unstable and dishonest family environment. One of the most valuable insights from therapy was understanding that my parents' financial crimes were symptoms of deeper character issues that had been present throughout my childhood. The same selfishness and entitlement that led them to steal my identity had manifested in smaller ways for years, teaching me to prioritize their comfort over my own needs and to accept responsibility for problems I had not created. My romantic relationship with David, a fellow volunteer at the identity theft prevention nonprofit, developed slowly and carefully as I learned to trust again. He had experienced financial abuse from a former business partner, and our shared understanding of betrayal and recovery created a strong foundation for genuine intimacy. Unlike my family relationships, our connection was built on honesty, mutual respect, and healthy boundaries from the beginning. David's background in financial planning complemented my newfound expertise in fraud prevention, and together we began conducting workshops for young adults about building and protecting credit. These presentations often included my story as a cautionary tale about family financial abuse, and the responses from audiences confirmed how common these situations were. Many participants shared their own experiences with relatives who had damaged their credit or stolen their identities. The house I purchased became a gathering place for friends who valued authenticity over appearances. Unlike my childhood home, where every detail was designed to impress visitors, my space reflected my genuine interests and priorities. The furniture was comfortable rather than expensive, the artwork was meaningful rather than status-conscious, and the overall atmosphere emphasized warmth and honesty over intimidation or pretension. Miguel often visited on weekends, and our relationship deepened as we both processed our shared experiences and built new family traditions based on mutual support rather than obligation. We discovered that we enjoyed each other's company when freed from the stress and manipulation that had characterized our childhood home. Our conversations evolved from defending or criticizing our parents to exploring our own goals and interests. The nonprofit work provided unexpected opportunities for advocacy and public speaking about financial crime prevention. I testified before state legislative committees considering stronger penalties for family identity theft, participated in banking industry conferences about fraud detection, and contributed to academic research about the psychological impacts of financial abuse. These activities transformed my personal trauma into meaningful social action. My credit score not only recovered, but reached levels higher than I had achieved before the identity theft, reflecting my improved financial knowledge and careful management of my accounts. The irony was not lost on me that my parents' criminal actions had ultimately made me more financially sophisticated and secure than I would have been otherwise. Their attempt to exploit my creditworthiness had backfired completely, strengthening my financial position while destroying their own. The anniversary of the repossession became an annual reminder of the importance of standing up for myself and refusing to accept abuse from anyone, regardless of family relationships. Each year on that date, I reflected on how dramatically my life had improved since choosing to prioritize my own financial security over preserving toxic family dynamics. The decision to publicly expose their crimes had been difficult, but ultimately liberating. Extended family relationships remained complicated, with some relatives supporting my decision to prosecute my parents while others believed I had been too harsh in my response to their financial difficulties. These divisions forced me to evaluate which family connections were worth maintaining, and which relationships had been built on false foundations of loyalty that excused harmful behavior. The most surprising outcome was discovering a community of people who had experienced similar betrayals and had chosen to prioritize their own well-being over maintaining destructive family relationships. Through support groups, online forums, and professional networks, I connected with others who understood the unique pain of being victimized by people who claimed to love them. These relationships provided validation and encouragement that helped offset the loss of my birth family. Looking toward the future, I feel optimistic about my ability to build healthy relationships and maintain financial security. The skills I developed while recovering from identity theft have applications far beyond credit protection, helping me recognize manipulation in all its forms and respond assertively to boundary violations. The confidence I gained from successfully prosecuting my parents' crimes has strengthened my willingness to advocate for myself in professional and personal situations. My parents occasionally appear in local news stories about financial crime or elder fraud, usually as examples of how desperation can lead otherwise respectable people to commit serious crimes. These articles serve as reminders that their reputations never fully recovered from the public exposure of their actions, but they also demonstrate that consequences can serve as deterrents for others considering similar crimes. If you're watching this and recognizing similar patterns in your own family relationships, please know that you deserve honesty, respect, and financial security regardless of your family dynamics. Identity theft is a serious crime whether committed by strangers or relatives, and you have every right to protect yourself through legal action if necessary. The temporary pain of confronting family criminals is far less damaging than the long-term consequences of allowing financial abuse to continue. Setting boundaries with family members who have violated your trust isn't cruel or vindictive. It's essential for your own protection and well-being. You cannot change other people's behavior, but you can control your response to their actions and refuse to enable their continued harmful choices. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the natural consequences of their decisions, without rescuing them from accountability. The pearl-white Lexus may be gone, but the lessons I learned from that experience continue to guide my decisions and strengthen my resolve to live authentically. My parents taught me valuable lessons about integrity and responsibility, though not in the way they intended. Their criminal choices became the catalyst for my complete independence and the foundation of a life built on honesty rather than pretension. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.